أخيا ورتل القرآن اصبح بصوتك اسمع الأكوان اقرأ كلام الله داوي نفوسنا لنحس في أعماقنا الإيمان كالحجارة قسوة فإذا القرآن حين
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode in our series Reflections on the Quran, and we're discussing the methodology of tafsir. In the previous episode we got to the tafsir of the Sahaba, commentaries of the Sahaba upon the Quran. Now we're discussing Abdullah bin Abbas. He was the person whose views on verses are the most frequently cited in the books of tafsir. And why is that? Despite the fact that he was quite young when the Prophet ﷺ died, he wouldn't have had the chance to learn much from the Prophet ﷺ directly. And we said that he gained his knowledge from the elder Sahaba. And so he would go to them and ask them, what does that mean? And what does this mean? So he's considered to have encyclopedic knowledge of the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ, moreover, made dua for him. Oh Allah, teach him a ta'wil, which refers to the explanation of the Quran, and give him understanding of the religion. So those are two things that he was making dua on his behalf. And of course, the understanding of the religion develops out of understanding the Quran. Now, one of the things about Abdullah bin Abbas, just in passing, because his information that he is transmitting about the Quran or about the Sunnah, very, very frequently he doesn't mention his source from among the Sahaba. And that's not a problem, whereas it would be a problem if it were a tabi'i from the generation after the Sahaba. If one of those makes a comment about the Quran without saying where he got it from, then that's automatically weak, because that tabi'i must have heard it from somebody, and possibly heard it from a sahabi, possibly heard it from another tabi'i, and that tabi'i may have been weak himself, or even if he was strong, he may have heard what he was transmitting from a sahabi, possible, but also he could have heard it from another tabi'i. So if we don't have a connected chain of transmission, then the statement of a tabi'i is not strong, it's not compelling in this field of tafsir or in hadith. Anything that goes by narration, if a tabi'i relates it to the Quran or relates it to the Sunnah without the intermediate link, then it's basically weak. There's some details that modulate that basic ruling, which we'll discuss later, inshallah. Now, there were, of course, other Sahaba. They were extremely knowledgeable about the Quran. Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, Ali, and definitely some of their statements about the Quran have been recorded and transmitted, but not nearly as many as Ibn Abbas. So why is that? Well, part of it is, for Abu Bakr, it's clear why that's not the case. He only lived for 2 years after the Prophet ﷺ, and those 2 years, they were very eventful years. His energies were concentrated on re-establishing the control of Islam over the Arabian Peninsula, because there were lots of Arab tribes that after the Prophet ﷺ died, they either became apostates outright, or they made their own interpretations of the religion, such as we were only supposed to pay zakat to the Prophet ﷺ. We're not going to pay it to Abu Bakr. So these are called the wars of apostasy that consumed virtually all of his reign, and then the wars of apostasy then led right into the expansion of the Muslim lands into Persia and the Roman Empire. So Abu Bakr didn't live very long after the Prophet ﷺ, and he was really busy with the affairs of state, so the opportunity for him to sit and teach people was extremely limited. Omar ruled for a much longer time, 10 years, and things had stabilized more by that time. So there's a lot more narrations from Omar than Abu Bakr. And Uthman and Ali, in that period, while Omar was the leader, they were also in his company. They weren't consumed with the task of leadership, but they were also busy with their affairs. Uthman was a businessman. And so although there are narrations from him, they're not nearly as many as those of Omar. But of course, his rulings have been collected because they had a fiqh bearing. But his statements on the Quran are not that plentiful. Ali is more than Uthman. And there were other Sahaba besides whose opinions about Quranic verses have been transmitted. Now, when we look at what the Sahaba had to contribute to the field of tafsir, part of it is simply their explanation. Well, this verse means that, or this word in this verse means that. But also, a major contribution that they made was in the field of asbabun nuzul. They said that this thing happened, and then this verse was revealed because of that incident. And the linkage between the incident and the revelation of the verse, it's only considered reliable if it was a Sahabi informing us of it. If it was a Tabi'i informing us of it, well, as we mentioned earlier, how did he hear about it? He didn't have direct knowledge, and so a problem develops about who did he hear it from. If we don't know, then that's it. We can't really trust that. Another area that their opinion has been given great weight is in the area of an-nasikh wal-mansukh, the abrogating and the abrogated. Now, this is a topic that we'll discuss in much greater detail in a separate episode, but it's well known and recorded that the Sahaba from time to time, they said that such and such a verse, nasakhat such and such a verse. So they use this term, nasakha, which later came to have a very technical fiqh meaning, but in the time of the Sahaba, it had a much more general meaning, which is that a given verse made a change to another verse. So their knowledge about how one verse impacted on the legal range or the legal scope of an earlier verse, that's really the only way that we can know about that process. If we're talking about a historical process where there's an earlier verse and a later verse, anybody picking up the Quran today, you're reading it and there's no tags there that say when this verse was revealed or that verse was revealed. So any reader who is reading the Quran after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you don't have chronological information about how these verses were revealed. The order of the book has nothing to do with the chronological order in which they were revealed. So how do you know which verse was before which one came later? The only way you can really know about that is if one of the Sahaba said this one was revealed first and then this one was revealed later. Now, some examples that are frequently cited with regard to the kind of clarification that Sahaba made about the meaning of a word. In the verse in Surah An-Nur where it talks about believing women should lower their gaze and be modest and display of their ornament only what is apparent. So what does that mean, only what is apparent? What is their ornament? So some of the Sahaba said, their jewelry. Some of them said the face. There are different interpretations from among the Sahaba. Another famous example, which is it's one of those hot topics. Maybe it's not quite so hot now, but in the last half of the 20th century, there was a movement which still is existent. It's not as influential as it was in some earlier decades, but the idea that the rulers of the Muslims are all kuffar, they're all disbelievers, and the core evidence that was cited by the adherents of this viewpoint was وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. And whoever does not rule by what Allah has revealed, then they are kuffar. Take a break and come back, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back. So we're talking about this issue of takfir, where at its peak, these people were declaring all the rulers of the Muslims to be disbelievers and waging armed struggle against them. At any given time, only a small number of people actually join these groups, but one of the evidences that they used to help attract new members was the verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. And those who do not judge by what Allah has revealed, they are kafirs. And there's a famous statement of Ibn Abbas about that, in which he said, huwa kufrun dun al-kufr. It is kufr less than the real kufr, meaning the kufr that takes a person out of Islam. And this is a lengthy discussion. We don't have time to get into that. But it's just an illustration of a commentary of a Sahabi about the meaning of a sensitive word in a given verse that would have major legal implications depending on how it is understood. Now, if a Sahabi makes a statement with regard to a matter of the unseen and he doesn't attribute it to the Prophet ﷺ, it's still considered to be related, that he got it from the Prophet ﷺ, because we've been prohibited from saying about Allah what we don't know, and no ordinary person has knowledge of the unseen. And the Sahaba were, Allah said about them in the Quran that He was pleased with them, and He made tazkiyah of them. This is when a person, this refers to like in court, if you have a witness, in order for that witness to be listened to by the court, for his testimony to be given legal consideration, there also have to be people who say, this is a person that we know to be upright. So that's called tazkiyah. So Allah has made tazkiyah of the Sahaba in the Quran in numerous verses, testifying that He is pleased with them, and therefore it's unthinkable a Sahabi would make a statement about the unseen out of his own imagination. Their fear of Allah, their taqwa, would prevent them from doing something like that. So when they make such statements, they're considered to have heard them from the Prophet ﷺ. Sometimes they make statements that are based on linguistic considerations, in which case that statement wouldn't be marfu'. Sometimes they made ijtihad in understanding a verse, and their ijtihad carries more weight than that of other people. But at the end of the day, ijtihad, it's a process in which the person may be right or they may be wrong. So with regard to the ijtihad of the Sahaba, sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong. It's known about Ibn Abbas that he had opinions on issues related to fara'id, to inheritance, which are issues that derive from Quranic verses, and his understanding of those verses was different from the majority of the Sahaba. There's a famous example of a tafsir of Abdullah bin Abbas that was not widely accepted by the scholars of tafsir down through history. The verse about magic in Surah Al-Baqarah, it says, the Arabic, وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ وَمَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانُ وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا يُعَلِّمُونَ النَّاسَ السِّحْرَ وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى الْمَلَكَيْنِ بِبَابِلَ هَارُوتَ وَمَارُوتَ. So this is part of a lengthy discussion that from time to time addresses the Jews and from time to time talks about them. So in this passage, it says that after they rejected the scripture, or they turned their back on the scripture, that they followed instead what the devils falsely related against the kingdom of Solomon. And to this day, you see that the Masons attribute their so-called knowledge that it all goes back to the time of Solomon. So, to return to the verse, Allah says Solomon did not disbelieve, but the devils disbelieved, teaching mankind magic. Now the way the verse is translated by all translators into English is according to this understanding that the devils disbelieved, teaching mankind magic and what was revealed to the two angels in Babel, Harut and Marut, the name of these angels. Now, that poses certain problems, like why would angels are mausum, they're sinless, why would angels be teaching people magic? Magic is evil. The passage goes on to say, the translation, the two of them did not teach it to anyone until they had said, we're only a trial, so do not disbelieve. In other words, by practicing magic. Now, why would angels teach people something which is not good? That was an issue that troubled mufassirs. And for me, the best explanation was proposed by Maulana Maududi. I mean, others proposed it before him, but he phrased it in a way that's kind of easier to understand based on our modern context, which is a kind of a sting operation. Sometimes when it's suspected that somebody is doing something wrong, then the police send somebody to him who pretends to be someone else to see if that person will enter into this illegal relationship. And then when they do, then they're arrested for that. That's called a sting operation. So Allah put that out there with a warning. This is bad for you. Don't do it. It's going to ruin you, but if you really want to do it, you can go ahead. So that's the dominant explanation of the verse. Abdullah bin Abbas, he looked at the word wama. The word ma has many meanings in Arabic. It can mean what, it can mean that which. There's 8 or 9 meanings at least. And one of its meanings is to negate. If you say, ma ra'aytu, I didn't see him, ma there negates seeing. And so the way Ibn Abbas interpreted that passage was that magic was not sent down to the two angels in Babel. That interpretation renders the larger passage incoherent. So that's why the great majority of mufassirs down through history didn't accept that explanation. Now there's another issue, which is when somebody makes a commentary, an empirically testable issue, or something for which empirical evidence can be gathered to see how plausible a given explanation is. There's a number of verses in the Quran that mention what seems to indicate creation of the earth and then creation of the heavens. In Surah Al-Baqarah, هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن سبع سماوات. Let me translate it into English without translating the key word. It was He who created all that is on the earth for you. ثم, He turned to the sky and made the 7 heavens. So frequently, ثم is translated as then. So the verse starts out by talking about creating everything that's in the earth for human beings, and then it says, according to this translation, then He turned to the sky and fashioned it into 7 heavens. And there's another verse in Surah Al-Nazi'at. It's a whole passage. It starts by saying, أَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ خَلْقًا أَمِ السَّمَاءُ بَنَاهَا. Are you the harder to create, or is the heaven that He built? I'll just translate the English. He raised the height thereof and ordered it, talking about the heaven. And He made dark the night thereof, and He brought forth the morn thereof. And then it says, and after that, He spread the earth. وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا. So, in this passage, the apparent meaning is that the heaven was created and then the earth. Okay, but the word dahaha doesn't mean create, it means spread. And the word dahi in some slang Arabic refers to an egg. And some modern Arabic speakers have tried to say that, well, what this is referring to is that the earth was given this oval shape. At any rate, Abdullah bin Abbas, he looked at these two verses and he said, this second verse doesn't talk about creating the earth, it talks about spreading it. So what happened is that first Allah created the earth, which is what he mentions first in that verse in Surah Al-Baqarah. Then he created the heavens, then he spread the earth. Okay, that's Abdullah bin Abbas's explanation. Now, that hinges upon the word thumma indicating chronological order. And there are places in the Quran where it's clear that thumma cannot mean chronological order. We're not going to have time to go into that now. We'll do it later, inshallah, in another episode. But then there's also empirical evidence to say that the earth, which is a part of a solar system with other planets, and they're all circling the sun, and the evidence has been mounting for the last 20 years or so that, there's empirical evidence can be detected with telescopes of planets distorting the movement of stars. So more than 100 planets have now been cataloged around other stars in the Milky Way. We're kind of in the middle of this topic, but we've run out of time. Inshallah, we'll pick it up next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahu a'lam.